Hello everyone, this is Rick Harris. Welcome to our session. This is an introduction to WorkKeys online test administration. And the only thing you need is a copy of our staff training plan, which has all the links and resources and steps that you need to complete on your own for this training. This webinar is designed to help you to understand ACT WorkKeys online test administration. The WorkKeys assessments are research-based measures of foundational work skills required for success across industries and occupations. They've been used for more than 2 decades by job seekers, employees, employers, students, educators, administrators, workforce, and economic developers all across the country. Let's look at our learning objectives. Following today's webinar, you should be able to recognize the test coordinator responsibilities, describe the steps required to administer WorkKeys online. You should be able to explain testing accommodations, and you should know when and how to complete an irregularity report. First, let's look at the test coordinator responsibilities. The test coordinator holds a lot of responsibility related to online test administration. The test coordinator is essentially responsible for keeping online test administration moving, and those responsibilities fall into 3 main categories. The first is the training program. You have to complete this, and because you have changes of staff, you may also need to make sure other people have to complete the training program as well. So this is an ongoing responsibility. Next, test coordinators are responsible for creating and managing accounts within the Validas Virtual Test Center, VTC. Test coordinators will create accounts and assign roles for other testing staff, including additional test coordinators, backups, proctors, etc. They will also need to create the accounts for examinees. We're going to discuss and review the processes later in the webinar, and you will also then, of course, manage testing activity within the accounts by registering examinees for tests, authorizing tests, and then generating reports. And then last, test security. This is the largest one because this is very important. Test coordinators need to ensure test security in the testing environment at all times. Proctors will typically monitor the test environment, but test coordinators have the ultimate responsibility of ensuring test security. Let's talk about the administrator training program first. The first responsibility of the test coordinator is to complete this training program. You might say, well, Rick, is this the training program? This is a part of it. What you will want to do is get the staff training plan that lays out the steps that you need to take, because some of the things are reading some documents, such as a document about the principles of high-stakes testing and the online test admin manual. You'll need to review those on your own. Once you've completed training, we ask that you complete and submit a verification form. This shows that you've completed the training, and it also allows us to access your contact information so we know who we are authorized to speak with in the event that you need support. Then we ask that the staff, your staff, backup coordinators, proctors, whatever they are, and if you don't have them, that's fine, whatever they are, whatever their role, we ask that they complete the same training program as well, and then they, in turn, each complete a verification form. Now let's look at the responsibility related to accounts. First off, before testing staff can complete the training program, the test coordinator must create accounts for them. So that means any additional coordinators, whether it's a backup or someone you may designate as a proctor, and you'll also need to create the accounts for examinees. Let's review how to create those accounts. Before we start discussing how to create accounts, let me cover some of the terminology. A site that is set up for WorkKeys online testing is a realm. Your realm or site is identified by a number. Your realm consists of 2 web addresses or URLs. You'll see here that all realms have an identical format. The only thing that changes is the realm number. The address begins with the letters VTC, and the examinee address begins with the letters RSP. The rest of the address is exactly the same. The realm ID for our training realm is shown below, so you can substitute that for the pound sign, the number sign, in either one of the addresses and get access to our practice realm. So once you input that address, your browser will take you to a login screen. This is the Validas Virtual Test Center, or VTC. You'll use the username and password. The user ID is not case sensitive. The password is. Should you ever see an additional field where it's asking you for realm, you need to re-enter the URL, because that's usually what happens. The URL is not exact, or the realm number is not exact, and then it will ask you what realm you're looking for. So you need to make sure that number is correct. Once you get in, you're going to look for user management on the left-hand side. Once you're here, it takes you to a search screen. What you'll want to look for is the create button on the lower right-hand side. When you choose create, you're going to be given a long form. It's a page, and regardless of a person's role, whether they're an examinee or a test administrator, this is how you will create their account. The first and last name should be the way it's stated on an individual's identification. If you're creating an examinee, keep in mind that the name in the system is what will appear on the ACT National Career Readiness Certificate, or NCRC, if the examinee earns one. Now, the examinee ID should be a number specific to the examinee. It should be used for all ACT WorkKeys testing, whether they're online or paper tests. We suggest using a student ID or an employee ID for examinees. If you're creating a proctor or other testing staff, you might use an employee ID as well. Date of birth are also necessary, the month and day. If you're a business site, you can use 9999 for the birth year because of EEOC regulations. Otherwise, you're going to want to put this in. If you have the information, there's less chance of an error than if you allow the examinees to put it in themselves. It will be required. Then note that the first name, last name, examinee ID, and month and date of birth are the match criteria used to match up records when determining if an individual qualifies for an NCRC. So it's important that these fields contain accurate information and that the same information is used for all WorkKeys testing, whether online or by paper. Now, we also recommend that you enter information for the user ID. This must be unique to the examinee. The system can generate one, but we really recommend you creating one that's easy to remember, such as their last name and first initial of the first name and a number. If you try to create a user ID but get the message this user ID already exists, then you may find it's best to click the generate button. But it will only generate an ID if you've already filled in the fields of the first and last name. We also recommend that you enter a password. The system can generate that as well, but we recommend you creating it. It's much easier to distribute. It needs to be between 6 and 30 characters, and it is case sensitive. The user ID is not case sensitive. I like email addresses for a user ID if you have that. And then password, at least 6 characters, case sensitive. The rest of the form is demographics, and we would prefer you leave that alone and let the examinees complete that once they log in. The next thing, after you submit the Create User page, it will take you directly to the Roles page. If you're creating an account for an examinee, you must click the box next to examinee so that a check mark appears in the box. If you forget to click in this box, the examinee will not be able to log in. So make sure to assign the examinee role to an examinee. If you're creating an account for a proctor, for example, you may want to add additional roles. You could give them a role of both proctor and account manager, and maybe even password manager, maybe even user manager. There's a whole section in the WorkKeys Test Administration User Guide about roles. Once you've assigned the role, then you click Submit, and that part is finished. That's how you'll create an account, whether it's an examinee, a backup test coordinator, a proctor. It's just about the difference in their roles. So once you're finished, you'll click Submit, and it will move on. And it will normally take you directly to the registration page. But for now, let's go ahead and discuss test security. We'll come back to registration later, because you don't have to register at the exact same time you create the accounts. You can always come back and do it later. So let's go ahead and talk about test security. Test security. The test coordinators are ultimately responsible that all tests are administered in a secure testing environment. As I stated earlier, you may have proctors that will monitor the environment, but it's ultimately the test coordinators who are responsible. So to ensure security at your test site, first you must confirm the identity of each examinee. Then you must authorize the test from an admin computer. Test authorization prevents the examinees from launching the test from another location, such as their home, where it would be impossible to verify test integrity. In addition, constant human monitoring is also required to maintain test integrity. Now, you may have a testing room with a viewing window or video cameras and microphones so that you can monitor. If you do have a setup like that, that's fine. If your room isn't equipped in this way, then someone, a human, a proctor, should walk continually around the room to monitor test takers. And then finally, discussion of test items is strictly prohibited. If an examinee has a question or concern about a particular item, you instruct the examinee to do the best you can. You are not to comment on or add in any way to the assessment. But then, after the assessment, you should include an explanation of the examinee's question and the test title on an irregularity report. We'll talk about completing irregularity reports just a little later in this session. All right, now that we've covered and reviewed the main responsibilities of a test coordinator, let's walk through the steps involved in test administration. So here they are. First, you'll register one or more tests to the examinee's account, test registrations. Now, you'll instruct the examinee to launch the test and wait for your authorization. Then you will use the TAO proctoring system, proctor window, and you will allow them to complete the test. Once the test is completed, you will generate a score report. So let's look at each step. So the registration process. Now, there's two ways to add registrations to someone's account. You can add them manually to an individual account, or you can add a single test to an account during a batch load process if desired. We cover groups and batch loading in a separate webinar, so we're only going to focus on the individual registration today. This is what most people do anyway. So to add a test registration, I've already showed you how to create a user. Once you submit all the user information, you're automatically going to be directed to the registration tab. But now I'm going to show you how to find a user that's been created so you can add a test registration. So you log back into Validas, the VTC, and you click on User Management. This time we'll use the search screen. Now you can search, this example shows searching with first and last name. You can search first or last or any bit of information that you have. You can also use a wildcard, which is the %sign, but you have to have at least 3 characters in addition to the wildcard. Once you do that, you can click enter or click search, either one, hit enter or search, and it will show you the results. Once you have the results on the bottom of the screen, then you'll click the radio button to the left of the individual that you're wanting to select, and then choose edit right above that. It will take you back to the screen with multiple tabs across the top, user, security, roles, registration. You'll click on registration to go to that tab, and then you'll also look for and find and click on the create button. When you do that, it will show you a screen of all of the assessments in your testing realm. Now, some people elect to only have the 3 core assessments that lead to the NCRC. Some people have those 3 assessments plus 3 Spanish ones. Some people have other assessments. It's entirely up to you. They can be added to your realm. You still only pay for the assessments that you use. So this is a screenshot from our practice realm. So we've got some old retired tests in there, but we also have the 3 tests, the practice test for graphic literacy, applied math, and workplace documents. So what you'll see in your own realm may be slightly different. But you select any test or test that you want to register, and then you choose submit at either the top or the bottom of the page, and the registration is created. So the subsequent screen then should show registration, and it should show that those registrations have been created. Now, the next step is when we actually authorize the test. Well, the authorizing of the test actually occurs after the examinee launches. But when they launch, and we'll see the steps in just a second, it takes place from the admin computer. So after they launch the test, you will authorize it. and it has to occur before they can actually begin a test. They can launch, but the test won't start until you authorize it. And this, of course, prevents the examinee from accessing the test from another location. So when should you authorize? Only when the examinee is present at your site, physically present, ready to begin the test, and under your direct supervision. So let's look at the steps required to authorize the test. So first off, before it's authorized, you have to launch. Once the examinee launches, and goes back to that RSP address that we talked about at the very beginning, once the examinee goes there, the first time it will ask them to complete their demographic information. So they'll finish filling out their address, remaining contact information, and other demographics. Once they have done that, your responsibility is to make sure that it is the right person at the computer. And then once they have completed that and submit their changes, save their changes, then it will return them to the home screen, which will show their registrations. Now, from this point on, when they log into the system, they will be on the screen, their home, showing their test registrations if they have any available. So you'll instruct the examinee to click on the launch button when they're ready to start the assessment, and it's going to be in that next options column for any assessment for which they are registered. Once they click on the launch button, they will get a towel screen that will appear, and the message directs the examinee to wait for authorization. They cannot proceed until the proctor or test coordinator authorizes the test. Next, on the admin side, you're going to be using TOW to proctor the test. This is a delivery mechanism that provides a great new interface and features needed for full compliance with accessibility standards. You'll notice that there's a Connect to TOW button. This will take you to a new menu. On this page, you have three options. The first is a basic system check. This will run a series of tests on your computer to ensure that you have the appropriate operating system, browser version, and adequate bandwidth. The next one launches a demo test. It's something you might want to run on an examinee's computer. If this runs and displays properly, it's likely the system will work fine for testing and no further checks may be needed. The next one is the one that you will use the most frequently. This is going to open up a new tab or window in your browser and show you the activity in your testing room. You're going to need to make sure that you have pop-up blockers turned off to access the proctoring screen. Once the proctor window appears, it will show activity in your testing center for the day. This will also include completed tests. You can use the buttons across the top to sort or filter the information that is displayed. You may need to refresh the view in order to see a current view. You can then authorize each person. You can also select multiple examinees and authorize them all at one time. Once the proctor authorizes the exam, the Proceed button will become active and the examinee will begin the assessment. One of the security features requires that the assessment be taken at full screen. Any attempt to leave full screen or switch away from the test screen will cause an interruption. Prohibited keys such as Alt-Tab, Control-Escape, or others will interrupt the test. Some key combinations are acceptable, such as Control plus or minus, which is the zoom function of the browser. The number keys and keypad will work the on-screen calculator in the applied math test. Each test begins with standard terms and conditions, followed by a tutorial for using the test interface. This is what the TOW testing screen actually looks like. Occasionally, the testing may be interrupted. This could be from the result of a power outage, a dropped network connection, or even a pop-up message from your computer, in which case you have a 1-hour period of time in which to relaunch an interrupted test at no obligation or charge to you. If the interruption did not cause the computer to lose power, the examinee should still see the screen that says wait for authorization. If they did lose power and you have to restart the computer, the examinee will log back into their account and they should see a relaunch button for the appropriate test. Once the testing is completed, the next thing remaining is to generate a score report. Now, keep in mind, score reports will print, and you'll print these after the test is completed. These contain personally identifiable information and should be safeguarded appropriately. The test administrator will print the score report after they complete the test, collect the report from the printer so that no one gains access to that personally identifiable information, and then give a copy of the report to the examinee. So let's look at the steps involved in the score report. So to find a score report, you log back into Validas, the VTC, you search for the examinee just like we've done before, look them up. Once you find them, you choose the registration tab, and from that point on, you have a couple of options. You can click the radio button to the left of any completed assessment to generate a score report for that assessment. But there are two reports you may choose from. One is an instant report for a single assessment, and the other is a summary report that will show any completed assessments. For the summary report, it's not necessary to select an assessment as it will report on all completed assessments. If you don't see the word completed in the status column, make sure the examinee is properly logged out of the testing realm. And then if you ever have any concerns, contact our customer care, and I'll share that contact information with you shortly. So from the drop-down menu under next to More Actions, you have access to either of those reports. So again, an instant report would be for a single skill. The summary report will report on all completed assessments. It will show you a pop-up window like this. This is an instant report. And then when you choose level report, it will give you a report that looks like this. This came from the practice realm, so there's not as much detail and data on here as what you'll actually see on your own reports. All right, so that's the instructions for administering the test. Let's talk a little bit about accommodations, and then we'll do irregularities and we'll wrap up. Following the provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act, testing accommodations are available for individuals with disabilities who need accommodations to take the WorkKeys test. First, it's important to consider the responsibilities of the test accommodations coordinator. Now, you may not have a separate person for this. It may be a role that you wear as well. But ultimately, the coordinator is responsible for evaluating and approving requests for accommodations. This is not like the ACT where you have to submit material to us for our approval. We tell you and give you guidelines on what you need, and once you have that, you make the approval. So ultimately, there's a whole section in the admin user guide about accommodations and all the documentation that you should have or you should need, and that should be all that you need. So ultimately, the test coordinator needs to evaluate and approve. They also need to make sure that any examinees who might need accommodations or arrangements are aware of what's available to them prior to test date. Okay, again, making sure they're aware prior to test date. Don't wait till the last minute. Then the coordinator themselves needs to make sure that you have qualified staffing. For example, if you have someone that needs accommodations and they need to have the test instructions read to them with American Sign Language, you need someone on staff that's able to do just that. Again, there's instructions in the test admin and user guide. And then after the test is administered, you'll need to submit a report of accommodated assessments form and send that in to ACT. So let's talk about types of accommodations. Again, these are not limited by this list. Refer to the admin manual for always the most up-to-date. So you can ultimately use sign language interpreter for the test instructions only because it is an interpretation. Assistance in recording responses, the use of a word-to-word foreign language glossary, or the most common one for online testing, which is the testing under extended time. And you can set that from within the Validas systems. You'll find instructions on how to do so in the admin manual. Your standard time options, are standard time, 1.5 times standard time, 2 times standard time, and 3 times standard time. And so most of the tests, the 3 core skills, are 55 minutes in length. If you have examinees that need other accommodations, they're really going to need to complete a paper test. So let's talk about incidents where you need to complete, or you might need to complete, an irregularity report and what those things look like and how you do it. Okay, the irregularity report is used to record every WorkKeys test irregularity. No matter how minor an incident may seem at the time, The irregularity report must be submitted as soon as possible after an incident occurs. You can access the irregularity report online or in the references tab in the on the admin site. When you're logged into Validas, you go to the references. It takes you to our website. You'll see a irregularity report right there on the page, and then it will pull up a form and you complete the information. Now, an irregularity is defined as any incident that is out of the norm for administering a WorkKeys test session. So let's look at some examples of those irregularities. We have individual irregularities, which typically affects one person or several individuals in a single circumstance. An example might be communicating answers to each other. Illness is one. If somebody becomes ill, you need to dismiss them from the room and complete an irregularity report. Irrational behavior. Somebody goes nuts on you. If they do that in an irrational or violent manner, you need to proceed as directed in the admin manual and then give a detailed explanation on the irregularity report. Prohibited behavior. These could be any number of things. Accessing a cell phone, electronic device during testing, looking at someone else's computer, giving or receiving assistance. Again, more details can be found in the user manual on things that are prohibited and what you should do before completing the irregularity report. Next, lastly, duplicating test materials. These, by any shape, fashion, or form, testing personnel and examinees are not permitted to duplicate or record any part of the WorkKeys test by copying, taking notes, photographing, scanning, or any other means. All right, so if you're using the TAO system, this is how you would complete an irregularity report from here. So on the right-hand side of the TAO Proctor window, you'll see an icon, the first icon, and that corresponds to the individual, and complete the form as needed. So when you select that icon, if it's that individual, it pops up an irregularity report. And so all you need to do is complete that, and it's submitted right there. There's nothing else that you have to do. Now let's talk about group irregularities for just a second. Group irregularities consist of things like disturbances and distractions. If you have a disturbance and you can't stop it, construction outside the window might be an example. You can't stop it and you can't move your examinees to a quieter location. That could be an example of that. An emergency evacuation, and many times bad weather or tornado or something of that nature. And this could be the same thing with a short power outage or something of this nature. If the emergency is over, a fire drill even, if it's over in less than an hour, you can reauthorize the test and they can log in and begin testing where they left off. You still need to complete an irregularity report. If it lasts over an hour, then you're going to need to start on a new test. Another one would be the inclement weather. Bad weather causes sites to close or terminate testing at the blink of an eye. And then, of course, copying tests. If you discover an examinees copying test items, this is also considered a group irregularity. And then, of course, power failures. Power failure is an example which you need to complete an irregularity report, but it may be over in less than an hour, and you may be able to relaunch the interrupted test and start where you left off. Here's how that's done in the TAO system. So in the TAO system, you should be able to complete an irregularity report here. So if you select the first icon on the side of the screen here, then you can select that and it will select all of the examinees, and then you can use a report irregularity button in the top blue bar so you can do them all at one time for a group irregularity. This makes it really, really easy. All right, so what we've done in this period of time we've spent together, we have recognized and looked at our test coordinator responsibilities. We've also covered and gone through the steps required to administer WorkKeys online. We've also talked about accommodations, what are necessary, how to evaluate those, making sure people are aware that you have the appropriate staff, and then reporting on those accommodations after the fact. We've talked about the irregularity report, different ways to do that. And then lastly, I'll leave you with customer service. If you need to reach us, our customer service group is open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time, and also Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. also Central Time, except for holiday weekends. And that number is 1-800-967-5539. 1-800-WorkKeys or workkeys@act.org. Thanks and have a great day.